wasn't always like this. Cindy once had a home, a family, but that all seemed like a distant memory now. As Cindy sat on the cold pavement, her stomach growling from hunger, she noticed a man walking slowly down the street. He looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place him. He was tall, with a kind face and deep, thoughtful eyes. He seemed lost in his thoughts, unaware of the world around him. Something about him made Cindy curious. Who was he? And why did he look so sad? Without thinking, Cindy stood up, her small feet tapping against the pavement as she hurried toward the man. She didn't know why, but something inside her told her she had to speak to him. She had never spoken to a stranger before, but this time, she felt like she had no choice. She needed answers to the questions that had been swirling in her mind for as long as she could remember. "Excuse me." Cindy's voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper. The man stopped, turning to look at her. His eyes softened as they met hers, and for a moment he didn't say anything. "Yes, can I help you?" His voice was gentle, full of warmth, but also a hint of sadness. Cindy hesitated for a moment. She wanted to ask him something important, something that had been weighing on her heart for so long, but she wasn't sure how to say it. After a few moments, she took a deep breath and spoke. "Do you know Jesus?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The question seemed to hang in the air between them, and for a moment, the man looked surprised. He knelt down to her level, his eyes filled with something Cindy couldn't quite understand. It wasn't anger or annoyance like she sometimes saw in the faces of the people passing by. It was something much deeper, like he truly cared about what she had to say. "Why do you ask?" he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. Cindy didn't know why she had asked that question. Maybe it was because she had heard stories about Jesus from the few people she had met on the streets. They told her that Jesus loved everyone, even the ones who had nothing. But if that was true, why was she still suffering? Why was she all alone? "I want to know if he's real," Cindy said quietly. "If he really cares about people like me." The man looked at her for a long time, as if searching for the right words to say. He seemed to understand her pain, her confusion. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "My name is Mel," he said, offering a small smile, "and I think I can help you understand." Mel Gibson wasn't just an ordinary man walking down the street that night. He was a famous actor, known by millions around the world, but in that moment, none of that mattered. To Cindy, he was just a kind stranger who had stopped to listen. Mel hadn't expected to be approached by anyone that night, let alone a little girl who seemed so lost and broken. But her question had struck something deep inside him, something he couldn't ignore. Cindy's eyes widened when he introduced himself. She had heard his name before, seen his face in movies on the rare occasions she could catch glimpses of TVs through shop windows. But she didn't care about that now. What mattered to her was the answer to the question she had asked. "Are you really him?" Cindy asked, a little bit of hope creeping into her voice. She had heard stories about celebrities, but they always seemed like people who lived in a completely different world. Yet here was one, right in front of her, listening to her. "Yes, I am," Mel replied, his voice soft and calm. "But tonight, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're asking about Jesus." Cindy looked down at the ground, feeling embarrassed. She wasn't sure why she had asked such a big question to a stranger, especially someone like him. But she had been feeling so lost for so long, and something told her that this man might have the answer she needed. "I don't understand why I have to live like this," Cindy said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "If Jesus loves everyone, why am I all alone?" Mel's heart ached as he listened to the little girl's words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the loneliness that weighed heavy on her small shoulders. It reminded him of his own struggles, the times when he had felt lost and unsure of his faith. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. This was a moment he hadn't expected, but he knew it was important. Mel knelt down on the cold sidewalk, his eyes locked with Cindy's. There was something about this little girl that stirred something deep inside him. She wasn't just asking about Jesus out of curiosity. She was searching for hope, for a reason to believe. Mel had been through his own ups and downs, his own struggles with faith. He knew what it felt like to question everything. And now, here he was, faced with the innocent yet profound question of a homeless child. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. How could he explain something so complex, so personal, to a girl so young and broken? He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't even sure he had all the answers himself. But one thing he knew for certain was that her question deserved an honest answer. Jesus, he doesn't promise that life will be easy. Mel began slowly, carefully choosing his words. But he does promise that we're never alone, even when it feels like we are. Sometimes we go through hard times and we don't understand why. It doesn't seem fair, but that doesn't mean he doesn't care. Cindy listened closely, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of hope and confusion. She had heard people talk about Jesus before, but it always seemed like they were talking about someone far away, someone who didn't really understand what it was like to live on the streets. But this man, this stranger named Mel, was speaking to her like he understood, like he had been through pain too. But if he's real, why doesn't he help me? Cindy asked, her voice trembling. Why am I still hungry and cold? Why don't I have a home? Mel took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He knew that nothing he said could take away her pain or make her situation better in an instant. But he also knew that sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that life isn't always fair. Even when you believe in something greater, it doesn't mean everything will magically get better. I don't have all the answers, Cindy, Mel admitted, his voice soft but steady. But I do know this. Jesus is with you, even when you feel alone. Sometimes he works through people, through moments that we don't expect. Like tonight, maybe that's why you and I are talking right now. Cindy blinked, surprised by his words. She hadn't thought of it like that before. Could this moment, this strange encounter with a famous actor on a cold street, be something more than just chance? Could it be a sign that she wasn't as alone as she thought? But I still don't understand, Cindy said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did this happen to me? Why doesn't anyone care? Mel's eyes softened as he looked at her. He could see the pain etched on her face, the hurt that ran deep. It was a question he had asked himself many times in his own life, during moments of despair when it felt like the world had turned its back on him. But somehow, through all of it, he had come to understand that faith wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting, even when things didn't make sense. Sometimes, bad things happen to good people, Mel said gently. And I don't know why, but I do know that you're stronger than you think. You've survived this long, and that takes a lot of strength. Cindy looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. No one had ever told her she was strong before. People usually just walked past her, pretending she didn't exist. But here was someone who saw her, who understood her pain. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Do you think Jesus still loves me? She asked softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Mel smiled a warm, gentle smile that reached his eyes. I know he does, he said firmly. No matter what you've been through, no matter how alone you feel, his love is always there. Sometimes, it's just hard to see it when we're going through the darkest times. Cindy didn't know what to say. For so long, she had felt like no one cared about her, like she didn't matter. But this man, this stranger who had stopped to talk to her, was telling her that she did matter, that she wasn't forgotten. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cindy allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. As the night grew colder, Mel and Cindy continued to talk, huddled on the sidewalk as the world moved around them. Cindy asked more questions about Jesus, and Mel answered them as best as he could, always careful to speak from the heart. He didn't try to preach or give her simple answers. He just shared what he knew, what he had learned through his own struggles. The more they talked, the more Cindy began to open up. She told Mel about her life, about how she had lost her mother and had nowhere to go. She told him about the nights she spent shivering in the cold, about the people who ignored her, and the ones who were cruel. But she also told him about the small moments of kindness, the strangers who had given her food or a warm blanket when she needed it most. Mel listened carefully, his heart breaking for this little girl who had been through so much. He wanted to help her, to do something that would make her life better. But he knew that handing her money or buying her food wouldn't be enough. What she needed was something deeper, something that would stay with her even after he was gone. "Cindy, I want you to know something," Mel said, his voice steady and sincere. "You're not alone. There are people in this world who care about you, even if it doesn't always feel like it. And no matter what happens, you are loved. Jesus loves you, and so do I." Cindy's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, she let them fall. She had spent so much time being strong, trying to survive, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But now, sitting here with this kind stranger, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for caring." Mel smiled, reaching out to gently place a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just remember, you're stronger than you think, and you're never truly alone." As they sat there in the quiet of the night, surrounded by the noise of the city, Cindy felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And maybe she wasn't as lost as she had once thought. And as the night went on, the darkness didn't seem quite as overwhelming anymore. Because now, Cindy knew she had someone watching over her, even if she couldn't see him. And that, she realized, was enough. The conversation between Mel and Cindy stretched into the late hours of the night. The city lights twinkled above them, and the world around seemed to slow down. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Cindy felt a warmth inside her that wasn't from a blanket or a coat, but from something much deeper. It was the warmth of being seen, of being heard, and of being cared for. Mel's words about Jesus, about love, and about hope still echoed in her mind. She had asked so many questions that had haunted her for years, and although she didn't have all the answers, she felt a new sense of comfort. Maybe life wasn't supposed to be perfect. Maybe the struggles she faced didn't mean she was forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, there was something greater out there, watching over her. Mel, too, felt the weight of their conversation. He had stopped to help a little girl on the street, but in the process, he had been reminded of his own journey. He remembered the times he had felt lost, the times he had questioned everything he believed in. Talking to Cindy brought back memories of his own struggles, and he realized that sometimes helping someone else was the best way to heal yourself. As they sat in the cool night air, Mel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he needed to do. He had given Cindy words of comfort, but he knew she needed more than that. She needed someone to take action. She needed someone to help her get off the streets and back on her feet. And that's when he made a decision. "Cindy," Mel began, his voice gentle but determined, "I don't want you to spend another night out here. I want to help you in any way I can." Cindy looked up at him, surprised. "You've already helped me," she said softly. "You've given me hope. That's more than anyone's done for me in a long time." Mel smiled, but he wasn't satisfied with just giving her hope. "I'm glad I could do that," he said. "But I want to do more. I know things have been hard for you, and I can't promise that I can fix everything. But I can help you find a place to stay. I can help you get warm, and maybe even get some food. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Cindy's heart swelled with gratitude. She had spent so long being invisible, so long being ignored, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. The idea that someone like Mel Gibson, was offering to help her seemed almost too good to be true. But there was a part of her that was hesitant. After all, she had been let down before. She had learned the hard way that promises don't always mean anything, and that trusting people could lead to more pain. What if this was just another empty promise? What if Mel was just saying what he thought she wanted to hear? Mel seemed to sense her hesitation. I understand if you don't want to trust me, he said softly. I know it's hard to believe that someone wants to help, but I'm not going to leave you here. You deserve better than this, Cindy. You deserve to be safe. Cindy's eyes welled up with tears again. She wanted so badly to believe him. She wanted to trust that someone could care about her, that someone could see her as more than just a homeless girl. But the years of pain and disappointment had built up walls around her heart, and letting them down felt terrifying. I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaky. I've been hurt before. People have said they'd help, but they never did. Mel nodded, his expression full of understanding. I know, and I'm sorry that people have let you down, but I'm not going to walk away. I'm not going to forget about you. If you let me, I'll do everything I can to help you. There was something in his voice, something in his eyes, that made Cindy want to believe him. Maybe it was the sincerity in his words. Or maybe it was the fact that he had already stayed and talked to her longer than anyone else had in years. Whatever it was, Cindy felt her defenses begin to crumble. For the first time in a long time, she felt like it might be okay to let someone in. Okay, she said softly, wiping her tears away. I'll trust you. Mel smiled, a look of relief washing over his face. Thank you, he said. You won't regret it, I promise. With that, he stood up and offered her his hand. Cindy hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking it. As she stood up, she felt a sense of hope rising within her. It wasn't just the idea of having a warm place to sleep that made her feel better. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Mel led her down the street, and together they walked through the quiet city. He made a few phone calls, and soon they were on their way to a nearby shelter, where Cindy could stay for the night. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. And for Cindy, it was more than she had dared to hope for. As they walked, Mel continued to talk to her, asking her more about her life, her dreams, and her fears. And the more they talked, the more Cindy realized that this night was changing her. It wasn't just about finding shelter or getting off the streets. It was about finding hope again. It was about realizing that even in the darkest moments, there was always a light waiting to be found. And as they approached the shelter, Cindy couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change. The shelter was small, but it was warm, and that was enough. As Cindy stepped inside, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The smell of hot soup filled the air, and the soft hum of voices created a comforting background noise. It was nothing fancy, but to Cindy, it felt like a palace compared to the cold streets she had grown accustomed to. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she wasn't worrying about where she would sleep, and that small victory felt monumental. Mel stayed by her side as they approached the front desk, where a kind-looking woman greeted them. She knew who Mel was, of course, everyone did, but she didn't let that change how she treated them. She smiled warmly at Cindy and asked if she needed anything. We just need a place for her to stay tonight, Mel explained. I'll cover any expenses. The woman nodded and quickly started filling out the necessary paperwork. Cindy stood quietly beside Mel, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Just that morning, she had been sitting on the corner, unsure if she'd make it through another night. Now, she was standing in a warm shelter, with Mel Gibson offering her support. The woman handed Cindy a key and pointed her toward a small room down the hall. You can stay here tonight, she said kindly. We'll get you some dinner, and if you need anything, just let us know. Cindy clutched the key tightly in her hand, the reality of it all starting to sink in. She had a place to sleep, a real bed, a warm room. It was almost too much to believe. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mel smiled down at her, his eyes full of warmth. You deserve this, he said. And this is just the beginning, Cindy. We're going to figure out how to get you back on your feet. Cindy didn't know what to say. She had spent so long feeling invisible, so long believing that no one cared, that this sudden kindness felt overwhelming. But there was something in Mel's voice that made her believe him. He wasn't just saying these things, he meant them. That night, Cindy slept in a bed for the first time in months. The room was small, with just a single bed and a nightstand, but it felt like the most luxurious place she had ever been. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to her. As she lay there, she thought about everything Mel had said. His words about Jesus, about love, and about hope still echoed in her mind. She had spent so long feeling abandoned, feeling like she didn't matter, but now she wasn't so sure. Maybe there was something more to life than just surviving. Maybe there was a reason she was still here, a reason why Mel had stopped to talk to her that night. The next morning, Cindy woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The sun was shining through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She sat up, blinking in the sunlight, and then it hit her. She was in a shelter. She wasn't on the street anymore. She was safe. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Cindy? Are you awake?" It was Mel's voice. "Yeah," she called out, her voice still groggy from sleep. "Come in." Mel opened the door and stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I thought you might like something to start the day." Cindy smiled shyly as she took the cup from him. "Thank you," she said. Taking a small sip, the warmth of the coffee spread through her, waking her up fully. They sat in silence for a few moments, both sipping their coffee. Cindy didn't know what to say. She had so many thoughts running through her mind, but none of them seemed to form into words. "How do you thank someone for changing your life?" "I talked to the staff here," Mel said, breaking the silence. "They have a few programs that might be able to help you. Job training, counseling, things like that. I think it could be a good start." Cindy looked down at her cup, feeling a mixture of emotions. She had been on her own for so long that the idea of relying on someone else felt strange. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't keep living the way she had been. She needed help, and for the first time, she felt like it was okay to accept it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, finally voicing the question that had been on her mind since the night before. Mel looked at her, his expression soft. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "Maybe not in the same way, but I've felt lost before. I've questioned everything, and someone helped me when I needed it most. Now, I want to do the same for you." Cindy blinked back tears. She had never expected to find someone who understood, someone who saw her as more than just a homeless girl on the street. Mel's kindness was something she hadn't known existed anymore, and it was slowly breaking down the walls she had built around her heart. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Mel replied. "Just take it one step at a time. You've been through a lot, Cindy, but that doesn't define you. You're strong. And now, you don't have to face it alone." Cindy nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, she felt like there was a path forward, a way out of the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. As they finished their coffee, Cindy realized that this was more than just a new beginning. It was a second chance. And with Mel by her side, she was ready to take it.